Ruth there. You'll not see it. It's not taking up the whole screen, but we'll do in a moment, because I'll start by, first of all, getting the sound, and then I'll make this fill up a bit more. Let me see. Oh no, I do it here, don't I? Yeah. Right, Molly.
Ruth 2. Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." So she went out and entered a field and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. Just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you." "The Lord bless you," they answered. Boaz asked the overseer of his harvesters, "Who does that young woman belong to?" The overseer replied, "She is the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi. She said, 'Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters.' She came into the field and has remained here from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter." So Boaz said to Ruth, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you, and whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." At this she bowed down with her face to the ground. She asked him, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" Boaz replied, "I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." "May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my lord," she said. "You have put me at ease by speaking kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servants." At mealtime Boaz said to her, "Come over here, have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar." When she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted and had some left over. As she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men, "Let her gather among the sheaves, and don't reprimand her. Even pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her." So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah. She carried it back to town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten enough. Her mother-in-law asked her, "Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." Then Ruth told her mother-in-law about the one at whose place she had been working. "The name of the man I worked with today is Boaz," she said. "The Lord bless him," Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. "He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead." She added, "That man is our close relative. He is one of our guardian redeemers." Then Ruth the Moabite said, "He even said to me, 'Stay with my workers until they finish harvesting all my grain.'" Naomi said to Ruth her daughter-in-law, "It will be good for you, my daughter, to go with the women who work for him, because in someone else's field you might be harmed." So Ruth stayed close to the women of Boaz to glean until the barley and wheat harvests were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law. Ruth 3. One day, Ruth's mother-in-law...
All right, Ruth 3 will have to wait. All right, so let's just stop the share. Okay, so there's the story as we have it. There's a lot in there. Some of it will be obvious, and I think quite a lot of it is not so obvious to our 21st century Western ears. But I realized, obviously, last week we didn't have much time to, or I didn't have much time to get sorted out, because we had, I thought we were going to be having the video, which I'll say something about that in a moment. But we just went straight into it. But I had a bit of a look in the back and thought it'd just be good to put a bit of flesh on the bone, so to speak, from last week, because I said at the start it's important to recognize the genre of the book you're reading, and we said, well, is this historic account? But if it's possible, it's also good to know when it was written and by whom, because that helps us a bit with understanding the context and what we're trying to say. And so it's worth saying that for some people, they actually believe that the book of Judges, which in our book follows, is immediately before it, that the book of Judges and the book of Ruth are part of the same book. And traditionally, it's thought that both were written by Samuel. And we might touch on the whys and wherefores as we come across different parts, maybe not tonight, but during the time. But so let's take it as a given about that just now. And so when you look at it in those terms, one way of looking at Ruth is that it's actually a short answer to the questions that are raised in Judges, right? Short answer of what's raised in Judges. And if I'll just share screen again, and I'll show you a map, he says. So you can unmute yourself if you want, but this is obviously what we know as Israel today, but you remember that when the Israelites came into the Promised Land, they were given land to each tribe, and here's the tribes so that we can see before us. Okay, down in the bottom corner, by the way, down here is Moab, which is where the girls, where Oprah and Ruth came from, and of course, I don't know if you can see the cursor, but can you see Bethlehem? Yeah, and it's very close. So that's in Judah, and it's very close to Benjamin, right? Where we find Jerusalem. Now, it's not an accident of history that these places are where they're said. And when you take the overview of what the Old Testament's talking about, you can see all these things feature in prophecy. The distance from Bethlehem to Benjamin is probably about 2 miles. So it was very, very close. The book of Judges is by and large all about what happened in the north, that there were two kingdoms, but it ends up that there's these two kingdoms. So most of the stuff was going all wrong up north, and the less difficult things were going on in Judah. So when we read, obviously you read Judges, we're not looking at that, but it's full of violence and things are going wrong right, left, and center, aren't they? And what they keep asking, this sort of underlying question always in the book of Judges is, can we not have a king? Yeah, and the answer, of course, we all know as good Christians and followers of Jesus, is that we have a king, and it's God, and that's what they had. But there was this great debate. So that's the sort of what was going on in the area and at the time. So it's written, whether it's written by Samuel or not, it's written around about the same time. And you can tell that by references to, for instance, David is mentioned, but he's not called a king. So you can see that it's probably written, when David was alive, but before he was king. And there's a few other pointers towards that. And then just to put the rest of it in context, then we'll have a look particularly at the chapter. One of the things where I've looked at some commentaries and thoughts about it, and there were a few things that struck me as really helpful. The first two chapters are about principally about the two women, Ruth and Naomi, and they're about loss and loyalty. There's going to be another two L's coming in a minute. When we get to chapters 3 and 4, it's about two influential men, and it's about love and line being the line to who should be king. So those are the things that were maybe a bit of a backdrop to what was going on, and some thoughts about. Now let's have a look at the Bible. So I'll go back. I won't be able to see you, but we'll go back to. Oh, I can still see you. You might not be able to see all of it just now, but you'll see most of it. So here we are. So now, do you remember where we left it last week? Where we had that there were some choices facing the women, weren't there? And Oprah and Ruth, they both wanted to support their mother-in-law. They're both very caring, and we realized it was at some cost. But Naomi said to both of them, you can't do this, you can't waste your life. And we thought last week, didn't we, about what it meant. There was no social security, there was certainly no widow's pensions. You know, how does it all work? And given the opportunity to go back, Oprah does. Given the opportunity to go back, Ruth doesn't. And we'll realize, of course, that one of them, we never hear about them again. Yeah, they disappear. And we don't know what sort of life they led, and that seemed like a good human choice, didn't it? Because they were going to avoid all the dismay and stress of which we sort of start to see here, don't we? About how do you feed yourself? But Ruth made another choice, and I don't think I'm giving the game away to say it's not a spoiler alert, but she's in the lineage to Jesus. So as a Gentile, so it's quite a remarkable thing. So there we are. Let's have a look now at what was going on. What grabs you, just as we did last week? What are the things that stand out for you in this chapter? If you want me to go down, you know, just let me know. I'll scroll up or down if you want me to. We can get half of it, a bit more than half at a time.
Jim, I don't think you're sharing screen because we can still see the map.
Okay. It says paused. Okay, right. Sorry. So I shall resume that, and I'll stop, and I'll go back to it. Right. Thanks for that. I just changed back. Where's the? There. You should now see it. Yeah. Can you see it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So anything that jumped out and grabbed you from what we heard in the reading, either in this bit or in the next 10 verses?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, can hear you, John.
I think the thing that stands out for me is that kindness, as a stone is thrown into a pond and the ripples go out, so when kindness is shown, very often the ripples go out and it's reproduced in other people.
Right. Okay. So that's not a particular, that's just the whole, the sense of it, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. And anybody else?
I think
One of the things I noticed is that Naomi seems to give lots of kind of counsel or advice or whatever to Ruth, and Ruth is very dutiful as she's been so far, and you know, sticking with Naomi, and she kind of, you know, she's obedient, isn't she? She does exactly what Naomi kind of advises her to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So there's obviously there's a lot of trust from Ruth. So let's remember, she doesn't know this place. She's in a foreign land. Yeah. And, you know, a foreign land is a dangerous place to be in, you know, several hundred years BC. So it's a tough time. Yeah. Anything else, and then we'll have a see if where we go from there. Eileen, you were going to say?
Well, I think it's a bit of a coincidence, really, that the field that they chose to work in belongs actually to a relative of Naomi,
Yeah.
and he then is very good to them.
Okay.
But was it a coincidence, Eileen, or?
A God incidence, yeah.
God incidents, yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
well, what it was it was unknown.
Yeah, Naomi didn't know
It was a
yeah.
surprise.
No.
So it's what just putting into thinking about what's actually happened here. Obviously, there's a clear need, right? We're going to go here. Yeah, we're committed to going there. So off they go, and they have to feed themselves. Now,
Yeah.
how do most people feed themselves at that time? What did they do?
I've always looked on the story as being someone doing a small favour to the other, and then it was all replicated and actually grew till the two people were uplifted together.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But for this part here, Morris, there's some things, that's what I was saying, things that are westernized that won't be so obvious. So they need to find a source of food, and it's clear what they do. They show up. I mean, imagine you were a bit short of flour for making bread, you know, even if you know, in the middle of the pandemic, you can't get any bread at Tesco's, but we could get flour, but then there wasn't any flour. So the next bit is you have to go and get some grain, don't you? So they wander into, let's not worry about whether they knew them or not, but they just wander into somebody's field. Does that not strike anybody as a little bit strange?
Wasn't there a thing in where landowners had to leave a certain amount around the edge of the
Into the
field for people
fields,
to go
yes.
and glean?
Yeah.
Yes,
Mhm.
There was.
yes, that's right. I can remember seeing people gleaning at the end of the war.
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah, or indeed people taking coal. Both of them were illegal. People might have done it.
Farmers crumbled in
Yeah, that's
1944, 45.
indeed, and I guess one of it's coming from the fens. Here's an interesting thing, because on the fens they didn't have any. Well, they were told to cut down all the hedges to make room for getting more production. So it meant that there isn't any place to glean. And some people would say, well, that was fundamental. There's something wrong with that. But anyway, there was law, because of course there was a sort of social law that came out of God's law that said, you know, some people will be hungry and we don't want them to starve, so they should have some way of getting it. But like lots of things, then and now, it's evident, isn't it, that yeah, you might be entitled to do it, but try doing it. You know, if I might be entitled to walk over somebody's field up towards Newbold Verdon, there's a lovely path which we sort of assume is we've got right of way. But if a farmer comes out with his 12-bore shotgun, I'm not going to have a conversation with him. Just if he says get off, we'll be getting off, right? So there might be the right, but what this is saying is it's certainly not clear that it was observed by everybody, isn't it? So there was we need to get food. Let's try this, and off goes Ruth. And what does she have? She's almost certainly never had to do this before. So what happens?
It's obviously from reading that, it's obviously a rather dangerous thing to be doing as well, if you're a woman.
Well, yeah, even more, more dangerous. Dangerous for everybody, but particularly dangerous for a woman, yeah. But she doesn't know what to do, does she? She's never driven a combine harvester, and she's shouting, well, what do you do? So she sort of follows what other folks are doing, and then Boaz you sort of get the impression, don't you, that Boaz is quite a lot older than Ruth. He's obviously an experienced, she's a young woman, and he's clearly a man of property and got people working for him and so on. And for some reason, he says, so when you read this in the bit that we can see, how does that come about? How does he decide to help her out?
Well, she's not just joining the women that are actually going behind the harvester or whatever and getting it. She's actually behind them. So she's actually not just gathering leftover grain.
Mhm.
It's leftover grain which is missed by the women as well,
Yeah,
which means there won't be so much of it.
yeah. And I don't know, but I'm sort of guessing that there'll be a gradation of quality of grain, won't there? So when you get to the leftover, you're just getting grass. You're probably not getting much. And so it doesn't exactly say, does it? Boaz asked the overseer of his harvesters, who does that young woman, and I'm not sure how accurately this is translated,
What verse is that?
belong to, verse 5.
Mm.
What's it say in your version?
I'm just looking it up. Then Boaz said to his servant who was in charge of the reapers, whose maiden is this?
Okay,
Mm.
Well, women were seen in chattel in those days, weren't
but she's a maiden.
they? Mm-hmm.
So, but anyway, that's so yeah. The way that the NIV is translating it, it's sort of saying who owns this woman. So
Mm.
she might not be a slave, although she could be because she was a foreigner. So Jews, you couldn't have a slave who was a Jew, but you could have a slave who was a foreigner.
Mm.
In other areas outside of Israel, you could be a slave wherever you were, but they would have had some sort of indenture. Is that the right word? Indentured things where, although you're not officially a slave, you've got a debt that has to be paid, and no matter if you work for your whole life, you'll never pay the debt off. So effectively, slavery. So here she is, and for whatever reason, so he gets some information. These overseas, pretty good, isn't it? What did it say? Anybody want to read that? Chapter, verse 6.
She's the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters. She came into the field and has remained here from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter.
So so here's Boaz, she's caught his eye. Now it might be he just thinks she's a fine-looking young woman. But for whatever reason, he wants to know more, and so he asks. And what does he get told? That she's from.
Moab.
So, okay, so the first thing is she's a foreigner. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
And then what else?
She was loyal to her mother-in-law.
Yeah.
Mm.
And she's asked, hasn't she? She hasn't just, she's not tried to, she doesn't know what sort of response. She can't know what response she's going to get, but she asks, can I take part in this? And then that she's really hardworking.
Mm.
And so that gets a response from Boaz, doesn't it?
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's he saying in verse 8?
Stay and work for me.
Yeah.
And also stay away from the men. And he's told them to touch her, really. Because in my version it says they won't molest her.
So he's brought her under his protection, hasn't he?
Mm.
He said, and then, as you read further down, he also speaks to his workers. Yeah. And then he tells them this really strange thing, leave some extra, do some of the work for her. Don't just leave her with the rubbish.
Hmm.
So he really is going out of his way to look out for her, isn't he?
Yeah.
Mm.
I've no idea. Does anybody know about this? He offered her some roasted grain. What do you think the difference between roasted grain and non-roasted grain is?
It's been roasted.
Well, to be ready for it'd be ready for eating.
Yeah, I
Probably
think,
be nice.
Better.
Be nicer to eat, I would imagine.
yeah, it'd be, yeah. And how would they roast it? How do you roast things?
Well, over fire.
In a fire.
In an oven.
Do you just roast it over a fire? What do you roast it in?
In an oven.
Yeah, but you'd have some fats, wouldn't you?
Mhm.
So when things are roasted, there's more. It's not just it tastes nicer; it also nourishes you more.
Hmm.
So I think that I'm not sure about that, but I think that's part of. Yeah, it's another evidence of his generosity to her. Yeah,
But he also gave her
Mhm.
bread, vinegar, wine vinegar.
yeah, and he's given her
Mm.
not quite. He's given her a bit of a, pub lunch, really,
Yeah.
hasn't he?
Butter,
Yeah,
bread,
share a
and
platter of bread and so. What was that? Yeah, ploughman's lunch. Yeah,
Mhm.
or it's
Yeah.
the harvester's lunch, isn't it? But so there's obviously something going on, isn't there? And she must have been thinking, well, who is this bloke? He's looking. I guess she's probably thinking most of all, she's thinking I'm being looked after. But then, then at the latter part of the chapter, we get this from 19 onwards. I think this is a slightly strange thing. So the mother-in-law, who's had the loyalty of the daughter-in-law, says, "Where did you glean today?" So I think it's a bit late in the day to be asking, isn't it? But yeah, where did you work? And bless the man that took notice of you. And then, of course, we have this coincidence, God instance, whatever we'd call it, because it turns out that he's a close relative. Now, what do you think the significance of him being a close relative is?
Well, weren't they, if they were close relatives, and weren't they supposed to look after widows who were related to them? And
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Uh-huh. There was a bit more to it than that, wasn't there?
He was wealthy.
Yeah, there's a bit more to what they're meant to do, because I think it's called the Levirate marriage. So when if a husband dies, such as has happened to you, yeah, and they had no son,
mm,
then the brother-in-law is meant to marry,
Yeah.
yeah, and have children. Yeah.
have children, which sounds really peculiar to us,
But it
doesn't it?
doesn't say that it's his brother. It just says a kinsman of her husband.
She says it's a close
Close
family,
relative.
Yeah,
Well, a
it's
kinsman here.
a
Well, that's
kinsman.
supposed- Yeah.
but here, so
It's
in our language, in modern day
Yeah.
language, it's translated as close.
Mhm.
So the implication is that this is somebody who's it does seem weird, doesn't it, that did we work this out? Did we? So
What?
if I die, if you were young, if you didn't have Gavin, if I died, you'd have had to get married to Alan, wouldn't
No,
you?
because that's your sister's husband.
I know, but that's the way it goes. You end up with more than one wife. That's the deal here. Yeah. And can you see why that's important?
Mm.
Do you think it's just a sort of exploitation of vulnerable women?
It's a shame for the women. I think.
What is it? Is
Well,
it?
you had a bloke. Well,
Uh-huh.
they don't have a choice.
Indeed. They don't have a choice. Although evidently here, Ruth has, because the choice wasn't go back to Moab and live there watching Netflix. It was go back to Moab and find a husband, because a woman cannot, in this society, in that society, cannot exist, virtually can't exist without a man. They need a man. So the social purpose of this is clear. You need a man, and you need, well, we all needed offspring.
Mhm.
And in particular, they needed male offspring. So that's what's going on. Yeah. I sort of knew that, but I didn't know the next bit, and I don't think, where have we got to? Hasn't yet got to the, yeah, I'll save there's a nice little thing that I came across that it'll come up in the next chapter, so we'll not go there for the minute. So what was I going to say? Yeah, in chapter 2, we've had, I guess, we've seen quite a lot of humility, that we mentioned that. I think Nicola mentioned about that, but there is also at the same time, there's a boldness and serving, but it's not been passive. It all began with a good choice. Yeah, it wouldn't be a worldly choice, but Ruth has chosen, because she had every opportunity to go the other way. Started with a good choice, because she's chosen Naomi. But when she's chosen Naomi, what else has she chosen? The first is obvious. Where is she living?
With her.
Yeah, but where? We've looked at the map. Is she living in Timbuktu?
Judah.
She's living in Judah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And where is she not living?
Moab.
She's not living in Moab. So she's chosen the country.
Mhm.
And maybe it's a bit less obvious because it's not spelt out in so many words. But she's chosen Naomi's God and not her own.
Oh yeah. Mhm.
So those are all the good choices that she's made, which would not be thought of in those days. There would have seemed a ridiculous series of choices, but she's made them, and we know that it works out well.
Mhm.
Okay. And so we get to the end of the chapter, and what do we see? So Ruth stayed close to the woman of Boaz to glean until the barley and the wheat harvest were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law. So she's we've got, that's my phone just ding ding ding, so
Set it
it
down.
might disappear in a minute, John, but it's also that end of the study part. We've seen, we said last week was about loss, and this week is clearly about loyalty, isn't it? And when you look in Hebrew, the words for loyalty and love are very, very similar. Often it's easy to mistake one for the other, but there's a good deal of love shown in this chapter as well. So that will get picked up in the next bit. So has anybody got anything else that they want to ask about or comment on in the study?
It's also about, sort of not overtly necessarily, but it's about God bringing good out of a bad situation, isn't it? Because, to be in the position where her husband had died and then her 2 sons had died, to all intents and purposes, that's a complete tragedy, and she must have felt absolutely devastated by it all. But God's hand is at work to bring her here back to her people, and it's sort of like, we've only got part way through the story, but it's creating a good, or bringing good out of an awful situation.
I mean, we know the outcome, yeah, but up till now, can you see any place that there are a couple of places where does God appear? Famously, Esther doesn't mention, God's not mentioned.
No.
He is mentioned here, but in what sense is he mentioned? Right, so we'll start at the bottom. What does it say here? Verse 20.
The
The
Lord
Lord
bless
bless
him.
him.
So Naomi's asking the Lord to bless Boaz.
Mhm.
Yeah. Where else do we see anything about the Lord or God?
Number 11.
Yeah.
May
The
Lord
workers, yeah,
be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God
Okay.
of Israel.
yeah.
So who's asking? It's another asking for a blessing. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I think it picks up what Morris was saying with the, small thing can lead to a blessing. Yeah. There'll be at least one other. The Lord be with you.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah. Just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the
Yeah.
harvest. The Lord be with you.
Yeah.
So,
they
and they
replied,
say
"The
the
Lord
Lord
bless
bless.
and they replied, "The Lord bless you."
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
so what we saying about the whole thing about, God is in this, is she's chosen
But
Naomi.
it's not just a wish. When they said the Lord be with you,
Yeah.
it meant something. It was something important,
Yeah.
part of the story. But I mean, it's easy to say the Lord be with you.
Yeah.
I mean, often you hear it, but it's not used in the Christian term. But this was so responsive and so like the way we're taught to, as Christians, that when we say the Lord be with you, there is an action to that,
Sure.
and the answer is the same. It's not just a comment that you can make.
It's maybe
They really meant
when
love for each other.
when people say it now, normally people from up north, and they say "bless you." It's quite a common thing for folk from the north to say, but rarely do people say "the Lord bless you," and that's maybe something that's worth noting, because they're invoking in the original text it would say Yahweh, but we don't really put that down in our vernacular. So it's been translated as the Lord, but be under no misapprehension. When it's Lord capitals, it's Yahweh. If it's Lord in lowercase, it'd be from, I think, Adonai, which is a human Lord. So they're asking for God's blessing.
Mm.
Yeah, go on, John.
Goodbye.
Okay. Yeah. If we understand the origins of goodbye, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and there'll be lots of things like when we're doing the course with the Jesus Game Changer course. That's some of those things will come up. There are lots of things that are a little bit hidden in our society because we've forgotten the origins, why we do things. I'll have to say, I think often when I go to other church or go to churches, and sometimes you ask why people do something, like the other day, I can't remember if you were there, Molly, but somebody saying about wearing hats in church.
Oh yeah, coffee morning last week, wasn't it?
Because people have always done it. Well, you think,
Yeah.
it'd be good if you knew why. Yeah, it might be good to do it, whatever the it is, or it might not. But if you don't know why, it's a slightly strange thing, isn't it? Whereas I remember a couple of villages away from us in Hadnam, there was a strict and particular Baptist church, a Grace Baptist church, and they used to have what's called closed communion. They'd fence the table. So what that means is only people who are baptized believers can be there for communion, right? And I asked them why. I helped them out. I did a few things for them. They were lovely, 4 old ladies, and they used to go, and they were really faithful. And you'd say, well, why do you do that? Nobody knew. I mean, there are reasons that you might agree or you might disagree with, but nobody knew that they just did it. And that, I find that incredibly sad, that people have lost touch with the roots. They just got the froth left. But there we are. So the Lord is there, as Nicholas says. We will see how Ruth comes to recognize it, because it's, you know, just as last week we thought what's going to happen next. Well, you've got to this bit, and the end, you know, the boom 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 bit is, oh, you know, she would have known what that meant. You know, this is somebody who's a close relative. She would have realized what she was saying. She wouldn't have been having a discussion about whether she'd meet him on Love Island or any other thing. It'd be, you know, Naomi's almost saying, this may well be the person that you should marry. You know, anyway, we'll see more about that. Well, not next week, because we'll have Ruth the musical.
We're having it next week, yeah.
Yeah, so we'll have Ruth the musical. And what I thought we'd do is we'll see where most people are